first contacted me through Reggie and asked me to become head of his security. So I knew Suge long before he got involved in all this stuff. He started hiring for his security Compton PD guys.
Reggie Wright, Trap Lord Ross, take one.
I was raised in Watts area. I was living in Compton at the time, and I became an officer in 1979 in patrol. I was in the community. I knew most of these kids that was involved. If I didn't know them directly, I knew their family. But all of a sudden, we started getting the crime scenes that had 30 or 40 rounds on the ground and realized these guys had got a hold of assault rifles. Oh, wow, we have a gang problem in LA County. The system wasn't allowing us to call ourselves gang because they didn't want to give the gangs the notoriety. DEA, the FBI, or DOJ, these guys weren't doing anything. I said Las Vegas wasn't cooperating with us that much. They kind of let it go. But that night, Tupac jumps in the car with Suge. Well, gang culture, you know, you don't talk to the police, you don't give up that information. I'm getting involved because Reggie is calling me, so they shut it off. They shut it down. They didn't want to talk to me, or they wouldn't take my calls to give them the information that night. We hear the gunshots because it's that close. I see this dude in the street, like trying to flag me down. I knew he had to be involved in that shooting. That's when he got killed.
I'm here with another senior figure from the Compton PD. We're going to be hearing more about being on the other side of the law when it comes to the gangs in the city of Los Angeles and Compton. I'm very excited to be sat down with Reggie Wright Sr.
Yes, sir.
And I'm really excited to hear a little bit more about your backstory and your history. So before we go any further, would you mind just explaining to me just who you are and where you come from?
Well, how far back do you want me to go? I mean, I'm 78-year-old. I could go back a long way. Or if you, speaking of just my Compton PD involvement, which one?
You were born in New Orleans, is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
So how did you and your family end up in Compton?
Well, as you just stated, I was born in New Orleans, Louisiana, back in 1946. My father, when I was 11 years old, we had a pretty big family. It was a mom and dad, same mom and dad, good Catholics, who ended up with 17 kids. I had 16 siblings. But I was the third of the 17. And in 1957, my dad decided to come to California. A lot of people from the South were migrating to California. And my dad worked in the postal system in New Orleans. And he was able, with the help of one of his friends that came to California, to get my dad a position out here in Los Angeles. So my older brother and sister kind of stayed at home with my mom to kind of help with the other 4 or 5 siblings behind me. And me and my dad came out. And we lived out here in West Los Angeles area with my dad's friend until he got settled. And finally, about, I'll say almost 9 to 10 months later, brought the rest of the family out here. And we lived in around, I would say, that's almost downtown LA, around 23rd and San Pedro for a while, until my dad was able to get us over into a project in Watts area called Imperial Courts Housing Project. My dad had finished college at Xavier University, and one of his classmates was the manager of the Imperial Courts complex. So he got a, well actually, we were trying to find an apartment that would accommodate us, because at that time, it was about 9 of us in total.
Big
so
family.
he needed a big, well, so we were trying to get an apartment that can house all of us. Well, at that time, they didn't have 4-bedroom apartments available. So what Mr. Ewing done, who was my dad's friend, he had two apartments that were adjacent to each other. And he, which gave us a total of 4 bedrooms, allowed us to move into 2 apartments that was there. And eventually, or later on, they tore the walls down So they no longer separated and made it like one apartment to accommodate all of us. So we lived there for a while, and that's more or less, I was raised in that area, you know, until I finally got married about not finally, but I got married about 18 or 9, when I was 18 or 19 years old. And I had moved just outside of the projects and lived there for a little while. But then I eventually moved to Compton. And my family also bought a house in Compton area. So I worked in the Compton area for a while. As I was married, I first started off at the Mattel Toy. Then I went to the post office and worked at what they call Terminal Annex down there for a couple of years. Went from there to Southern California, Edison, which was the division was in the Compton area, was right up my alley because, you know, I was living in Compton at the time, and so that worked out real well. So as I was working there, and I worked there for about 11 years, I got to know the community and all that, and my cousin came over from LAPD. He was a captain there, and he became chief of police over there in Compton. But prior to that, I had gotten interested in it because some of the guys that were helping me out with my basketball program and taking kids all over the place with vans, in vans, they were Compton police officers. So I developed an interest in becoming that. But when my cousin came over, that really incentivized me to go for it. So I ended up taking a leave from the Edison company, and that was in 1979. Well, actually, before then, I joined as a reserve officer, and I worked Compton PD as a reserve officer from 76 till I became a regular in 79. And then I just had to go back through the academy and get updated, and I became an officer in 1979 in patrol. I worked in patrol. I started off just a regular, you know, rookie, but I had so much knowledge in terms of the community and what was going on in the community. And I was 33 years old then, so I was pretty mature. And then I had that reserve experience. Right about that time is when all the gang activity had initiated. The Piru blood rivalry and all that had started when I was a reserve officer in 76. A lot of it really kicked off in 76. And so by my experience with the community and knowing a lot of the families in there, because part of my job at Edison Company was to turn lights off and on and to go collect when people weren't able to pay. And I had a unique way of doing that because I came from, like I said, a project, and I remember my mom hiding from the collectors when we were living in the project. So I had an empathy for that a little bit, but I had to do my job. So in going to these families, if they weren't able to pay their bill and I had to terminate the light service, back then they didn't have all this technology nowadays. We either cut it at the meter or take the fuses out or what. But I would do that and write it out that they're off. But I would show somebody in the family how to turn it back on once I left. So I became a little famous for that, and the community loved me for it. So consequently, you know, I knew a lot of their kids who eventually, when I became a police officer in Compton, and I had to deal with some of these gang members that I had dealt with their parents and knew about them, and their parents loved me, so they gave me a lot of respect. So in my career, like I said, I did patrol work as a rookie for about a year, but because of all this prior knowledge that I had in the community and dealing with it, I was put on a detail. At that time, this was about 80 or 81, the activity was getting real crazy in the Compton area, but they weren't allowed. The detail I was on was myself and a white guy who spoke fluent Spanish, named Steve Beckman. He was a kind of a veteran officer, and I became his partner, and they called us a graffiti detail. And at that time, the system didn't want to, or the county didn't want to say you were gang, because they didn't want to give gangs that recognition that they were going to be eventually notorious. Yeah. So the thing is, we were gang detail until about 82, I think, or somewhere around there. That's when the crack cocaine started, and the gang members started getting involved in the distribution or selling of the crack cocaine. That enabled them to have finances, money and stuff. So at that time, we didn't have any gun regulations when it came to assault rifles and automatic weapons and stuff. And what started happening is because these guys had the money, they started buying all these assault weapons and stuff. And so that really kicked it up in about 82. That shootings that we were going to in the 70s with these gangs going at each other were more or less handgun shooting or stuff, or shotgun for that matter. But all of a sudden, we started getting the crime scenes that had 30 or 40 rounds on the ground and realized these guys had got a hold of assault rifles, and, AR-15 and all this different stuff. So anyway, that really kicked up the violence and made it really very tragic, the thing. But see, just getting a little bit into the mentality of gang members, and I'll talk a little more about it once I get off of me, but I was just mentioning how I got started and gained the knowledge to start dealing with the, how would you say, the coming up of the rivalry, the activities that were going on around us. And what I noticed and realized, and by knowing a lot of the guys in the community how they're coming up, that all of a sudden what became a big deal, like I said, was the shootings, the type of weaponry that was used during the shooting. The thing is that the mentality was different as this started happening, because when I was younger and stuff, saying raised in the projects and stuff, they had not gangs, because they wouldn't call them that, they call them social groups, like the Huns were in Nicholson Garden, the Imperial Course had Orientals, and the Jordan Down. These are the main housing projects in Watts area. They were called surveillance. But we didn't get involved in none of that drive-by and all that. That wasn't even thought about, shooting people. We would have big fights on the gym field or whatever, and you would just go at it, just like a rumble. Yeah. And the most weaponry you might have is some brass knuckles or wood or something. I mean, it was deadly weapons, but in a sense, especially the bumper jacks, that was the extent of it. But you fought the enemy. Yeah. The involved people were the people you wanted to be involved with, and made the best man win. But then, around about that time, the Vietnam War had just ended or kicked up. But a lot of guys from the hood, as you would say, got drafted into the military in I'd say the late 60s, the early 70s. But most of them had gangster mentalities anyway when they went in. So but they were drafted, but they got dishonorably discharged. But before they got discharged, they were trained. Yeah. They were trained in this warfare. This hit and run, sit in the bushes and snipe at people, snipe or whatever. That mentality came back to the hood. So some of them guys that were involved in that type of activity, start doing these drive-bys. See, that's where that mentality comes, where they didn't face their enemy. And that's something that I really had a disdain for, because it was cowardly. But that kicked up. And then the sales of the crack cocaine during the early 80s and late 70s, early 80s, enable them to have this kind of weaponry to go at each other. And so I had a little upper hand in that, because I was in the community. I knew most of these kids that was involved. If I didn't know them directly, I knew their family, their parents. So it enabled me to get a lot of intelligence, I built a lot of trust with them, because I knew what they were going through. Didn't condone it, but I knew what they were going through. So I related to them in a way that would enable me to get intelligence about what was going on with all this different stuff. That's kind of my background, and how I got involved to the knowledge to talk about what I want to tell you about the inception of the Crips and the Pyrus, when all that really kicked off. But the origin of first the Crips, who first came into our area, into the Compton area, had been started basically in the LA area, up around Washington High. What was that? I would say that would be the southeast portion of the city. in LA. And those guys started this Crip stuff. A guy named Raymond Washington and a couple of other guys, I forget the name, Mac Thomas. These are guys that were involved in this kind of stuff as I was coming on the department. And I didn't know them directly, but when it started coming to Compton, you know, this gang thing and this more or less claiming Crips that got started by this group who, I don't know, it's a lot of stories about how it originally started. Some people say that Raymond Washington or somebody used to walk with a Crip. Like, you know, you get that theory. I've heard some other theories, you know, but the actual, how the Crip name came about, I'm not even till today certain, because there were so many theories. But it became a phenomenon. And it actually started in that area. But eventually, that came to the Compton area. And when it first started, it was an area, South Compton, southwest area of Compton, over by the airport. They had some apartments. Because in most of these gatherings or these groups that more or less started thuggerish or acting crazy or whatever, come out of, a dense housing area. It wasn't like good neighborhoods or something. They would come from either apartment complexes or project or that. Over in Compton, they had a group of apartments, about 8 or 10 of them, that was in this little one called the Grandees. It was off of Grandee and Alondra. And a lot of the guys over there started hanging around, started claiming this Crip stuff in the Grandees. But then over in other areas of Compton, and I'm talking about 69, 70, around 70, that they start, 1970 that I'm talking about, the Crips was centralized a little bit in Compton, the whole Compton part. And they started ravaging, started doing crazy stuff, attacking decent guys, kids that weren't even into that stuff. They start assaulting them and just taking advantage, bullying them, you know, these Crips. So the thing is that a lot of kids didn't want to get caught up in that stuff, especially in the Compton area, as like I said, the Crips start dominating. And on the west side of Compton, these were like 2-parent homes, urban, little decent tracts. And these kids didn't want to get caught up in that kind of stuff. So to be anti-Crip, that's when they start formalizing the group over on the west end, on Piru Street near Central. And one of the main guys, and it probably were other guys that names I'm not throwing out, but mainly Sylvester Scott Puddin and Vincent Owens, the guys that lived on Piru Street, wanted to combat, more or less combat or become rivals of these Crips, because they were anti-Crip. So they started their little group, and they called themselves West Side Pirus, or first just Piru Boys. And then they went, since they were on the west side of Compton, other areas a little further out started claiming Pirus in Compton. To also offset, and this all is going down in 70, 71, not too far from each other. The Crips, they started because it was migrating from LA, this Crip phenomenon. But like I said, the Piru thing started based on Piru Street with these guys in the 72 and whatever. But even on the east side of town, up around Ludus Park area, and the high school over there was, it is Dominguez High School. And their basic colors are red and gold. I forgot to mention that when the Crips started Piru started on the west side of Compton, the main high school there was Centennial. Because basically there's only 3 high schools in the Compton area. Centennial, that's on the west end, that I'm about to talk about. The central areas where most of the Crips, if they didn't go to school, they went up to the school. They might then go to classes. Yeah. They were central at Compton High, which their colors was blue and white. And then further east is Dominguez High School. As I said, their colors was red and gold. Centennial was red and white. Okay, so those areas kind of adopted those red color, where the Crips adopted the blue color. And that's where you came up with the blue rags and the red rags. And that's kind of all kicked up in 72. And they started having this kind of little rivalry, okay? It got terrible because within it, like I said, they were able to get this weaponry and they started doing these drive-bys and shooting at each other. But around about that time, that was the basic areas, I would say, like that started it. But then that's when in each side, individuals that wanted to become part of either a Piru or part of Crips, they started having their sets named after streets, basically, that they came from. You know, like Crips, they were either Nutty Block or In Hood or just little area type thing to separate and get their own identity as being a different part of the Crip organization, for you will. But then on the west side, as I said, that putting them started this west side Piru. So, and then eventually later on, they started having streets named like after Fruittown Pirus, which was streets that were like Elm, Pear, Peach. You know, those streets, those guys started calling themselves Fruittown Pirus. Then you start having other areas, the little streets, Burrs, this and that. Crips started, you know, with their little set, like I said, Nutty Block Crips, Spooktown Crips. Everybody started getting a set. But all that went on, and the rivalry and the shootings between the Crips and the Pirus went real crazy from about 75 to about 1980 or something like that.
So am I right in understanding that there was actually a famous incident where a basketball game was shot up around 74?
A who?
Was it a basketball game at Compton High where there was a shooting?
Oh, no, you're probably talking about the incident at Dominguez High School. They had a basketball game there.
Yes.
At Dominguez, and it, I think Dominguez High, like I said, with red, white, most of those guys claimed Piru. And I forget who they were playing, but I think it was a thing that basically Crip. But at that game, the respective members of those two different sets were attending the game. So naturally, when they were there, it all jumped off. And somebody got shot or shots were fired. That started. But even that was about 75, 76. But they also had a big incident that kind of kicked up a lot of this in 76. Now, mind you, you had a few other shootings prior to this, but this is what we're about to talk about is what really kicked it off and got it, kicking it off real loud. But what I'm trying to say is they had a few other incidents, like a guy named Ray Johnson. I kind of remember, I think he was a Crip or Pirate, I'm not even sure, but he got killed at that time. Just before, I think 74, just before that game we're talking about. That kind of stirred up a little mess between them.
And was there another famous shooting, I believe, at the Palladium, maybe a few years before that?
No, they talk about this Crip stuff at the Palladium is when Tookie Williams and Baby Boy and them, they were muscle-bound cats. Yeah. They were showing off at I think it was either the Palladium or Griffith or some venue in LA. And they were bullies and showing off, but somebody ended up getting, at that time, leather jackets were popular. Yeah. And I guess some kids, decent kids that was there for the concert, got ripped off for the leather jackets. And I think somebody got beat down or shot or something, but it became, it was notorious. They noted it, and it was on the news and all that. So they didn't talk so much about it being a Crip thing. They talked about it as being some gang thing or a bunch of things that took advantage of them. But the Crip phenomenon really started in 77 or something, because like I said, they were selling this cocaine and stuff. They were getting money to buy a gun, but they also was having enough money to venture out of their neighborhoods and start going into LA, like the affluent areas, West Side, Beverly Hills, all this. In that venue, they went to a concert, some Crips, and ran into some Bloods, and a shootout occurred in Westwood.
Yeah.
It was out in Westwood, and this young lady named Terry Tashima, I think she was an SC student or something, and they happened to be at the movie theater or something. She got caught in the crossfire and got killed, unfortunately. But naturally, that became, I'm trying to get my thought on notoriety. The notoriety became because of the way this incident occurred. And in that particular shooting, a few days afterwards, and mind you, we were having this kind of warfare, killings and stuff in the Compton and South LA areas and stuff, but it wasn't getting any type of notoriety. That's how I wanted to come out with it. Notoriety until this shooting occurred. Once Terry Tashima got shot, next thing I noticed, because you know I was working gangs then, I had kind of moved up a little bit, and it was in the early 80s. And all of a sudden, the next day in the papers and stuff, oh, wow, we have a gang problem in LA County. There's over 30,000 gang members. All of a sudden, the stats and the notoriety came out. I was like, wait a minute, where y'all been? They've been gang. Matter of fact, even at my own department and stuff, the system wasn't allowing us to call ourselves gang because they didn't want to give the gangs the notoriety. So that's when all of a sudden we went from a gang, from a graffiti detail to a gang detail. Yeah. And that started going the same way in LA and stuff. And it really took LA a while with their crash unit on it to want to identify those Crips, give them some notoriety. Yeah. But anyway, that happened. Yeah. And if you remember about the 80s, in the 1980s, the Cold War had kind of started. I mean, came out on the Cold War. And I think about 80 something, you didn't have all this undercover agencies, you know, that used to be government agencies that were deployed to deal with all that. I'm talking about the DEA, the FBI, DOJ. They started having acronyms I had never heard of before. These guys weren't doing anything. So they started assigning them to work this gang stuff because all of a sudden now we got 8,000 gang members. So I remember getting a call when I was a sergeant over the gang unit from someone, a couple of agencies that said, hey, we got a couple of people, we want to start a task force and start working these gang shootings and all this stuff with your gang. So we started getting task force involving FBI, DOJ. They even had the DEA. I didn't even know they had a DEA, you know, because I wasn't dealing with drugs that much. It was proliferating, but my thing was the gang stuff. So they came in and got involved and started helping us try to suppress this. And that's when they started coming up with regulations to control this assault weapon and these automatic weapons, which helped us. But during the interim, and like I said, it was getting vicious shootings and drive-bys between the two sets. Well, they had gotten so far into it that as life goes, they were fighting each other. But then it got so greedy and so violent that the sets, the Crip sets, and later on the Pyru sets, they start fighting within each other. You start having Crip on Crip warfare, Pyru, warfare. I mean, so it really got crazy and led up to all the way up until the 90s with all these serious shootings. And that's kind of like what kicked off and got real crazy.
It sounds like, you know, in the 70s, like you say, the shootings started to rise. People begun to wake up to the gang problem. And then it seems like in the 80s, because of crack cocaine, the gangs were able to access so much money that the violence went to another level. Is that accurate?
Yes, and it did go to another level. But also, it brought up a unique aspect. All right? Now, remember we talked about how violent it was between the gangs shooting at each other, doing the drive-bys and committing all this blood. Oh, let me say so. Don't let me lose that point, but yeah. I forgot to mention that Pyru's was a Compton thing, and it is still today a Compton thing. But the red one started and moved into the LA area real big, but they didn't want to identify as Pyru's, like the Brims and 83rd, but they because of the red adopted, someone came up with this connotation of bloods. So the gang members that were doing the same thing and all that in the other areas of LA were known as bloods. So the difference between Pyrus and bloods, they both belong to the same mindset or concept and all this with the red rags and all that, but they didn't want to be. If you hear somebody talk about blood, you know, that's a set that's out of Compton. If they want to talk about red, they may say Pyru or they will say Pyru if they Compton, but they say blood to each other, you know, because the connotation between that group was blood. Hey, blood, hey, this, blood there. In the Crips side, it was cuz. They had adopted the cuz. So that's how you know kind of what's not necessarily set, but what division you're from, Crips or Bloods. That's kind of what's going on. But anyway, I was getting back to that point I was going to make about LA. Help me out, because
well, I was sort of getting onto how the crack epidemic kind of made the gangs very rich, and then things kind of escalated a lot.
Really escalated, especially the purchases of these assault rifle stuff, because now the crack cocaine comes into the area, so naturally the dealers are the people. I'm not going to get into this Contra stuff, but that happened. That really happened with how they flooded the area with cocaine. But that activity is what emboldened these leaders of the Crips and our Bloods to have money and stuff, because they brought the cocaine into the area and they started distributing the cocaines in these areas. So now gang members was coming up. You used to have the pretty boys that was handling the cocaine in the area that was almost like pimp-like. You know, they had the girls and all that. But they, all of a sudden, I guess whoever was distributing it or bringing it, the Contras or whoever the heck they were, people from, what the country? Not Venezuela, but Colombia. There you go. They were bringing it in, but they got smart. And in the jail system, they realized who the shot callers in the neighborhoods were, okay? So they started meeting up in the jail system with these shot callers and telling them, hey man, we got products we can get to, and they started entrusting these products into these shot callers in Bloods, Pyrus, and Crips. And all of a sudden they start really selling it into the communities, and that crack cocaine epidemic, you know, went crazy, but it gave them finance. I mean, they became that. But greed gets everybody. And it got so bad that at some point they were fighting each other and trying to start shooting each other. Dope dealers were shooting them, because when the system, these task force I was talking about, was cracking down on all that, realizing it, and they started cracking down on it, then they started putting a lot of them to jail. So the guys that used to sell it or work for started robbing the dope dealers. In the late 80s, we had a lot of that activity. But as I'm saying, the greed and the money and all that brought on this thing where me and one of my partners, we were riding around in Compton, and one day we got behind a car, and in the front seat we saw two shot-calling Crips. They were riding together, of course, but in the back seat it was two shot callers in the back, Pyru shot callers. I'm not gonna say their name, but those, there was four of them in there. The two Pyrus in the back. And then I looked at my partner, Bobby Baker, who was a sergeant at the time with me. We looked at each other and go, but you know, they kidnapped him. We figured they had him at gunpoint in the car. So we pulled them over, right? Carefully pulled them over. We knew them. They knew us, me and Bob, because we were the gang detail. So as I'm pulling them out the car, they're going, oh, Reg, we cool. Cool, what's up? So Bobby pulled one of the Crips, the Pyrus to the side, shot caller. I pulled the two Crip leaders to the side. What the hell is going on? That's when one of my side told me, and Bobby they told him the same thing. Hey man, it's all about money now. It ain't about killing each other. We realized we gotta get away from that. We gonna be making money. You gonna say we gonna get along, Red? Don't worry about it. You ain't gotta worry about all this shooting no more and stuff. So it's a good thing. Yeah. Kind of okay. He ain't kidding that. So I let him go. Bobby was very articulate. He was a damn near Magnum cum laude from SC or something. Just wanted to be a cop, right? And he said, Reg, don't you see what's going on? They bringing in all this dope and putting them in their hands. And now they making money. And sure enough, that brought, it decreased some of the gang warfare because they start getting along. Yeah. Certain groups of it to make money.
Got it.
But after they started making money behind this endeavor, after that, greed sets in because they say, wait a minute, we done made money. I'm in the bed with home for this Pyru, but they still were shooting my brother, and they still killed this. Pyru said, then the warfare started again between Pyrus and Crips because now, as you were saying, they all had more weaponry, all this, and finance, and that got crazy. That was in the 90s, and it took us a little while to get all that calmed down. But that's kind of the mess that was going on in the separation.
So there's two really interesting things that happened in the 80s. Obviously, you had crack cocaine, but also the rise of gangster rap. You know, you had, I imagine you were policing the community when Straight Outta Compton, F the Police.
Eric Wright, everybody thought he was related to me. I'm Reggie, and they thought me and E was related.
Wow.
For a minute, I didn't know. when all that jumped off, when NWA started, how we were involved with it, a guy named Lonzo Williams, he was like the producer that was into this business that started concerts, a little hip hop things with NWA and all them. It was a place called Doodles in Compton off of Central, and he would have these, I would say Friday hip hop concerts and stuff with these guys to promote these rappers. But the thing is that he brought Crips and Bloods together attending these things. So we had to get involved in those because to keep them from shooting or beating up each other. Yeah. But they would have not a ceasefire, but they kind of wanted to party and experience these new rappers that was coming along that was from kind of both sets. Yeah. You know, this group like NWA and the Wrecking Crew and all them. Lonzo started hiring Compton PD guys off duty. And his cousin was one of us, Philip. And so we started working the events to keep it as civilized as it could be, but still we had problems at them. But they branched out, and that's when they started doing videos and stuff in the area. But Eazy-E, Eric Wright, who was their first group, part of it, and then you had Dre and all of them that were part of the Wrecking Crew that had their little groups. But then from there they started venturing out, and then Eazy eventually died. But yeah, a lot of it got started in Compton, and matter of fact, a lot of people questioned how we, the police, felt about like the Pyrus with DJ Quick and all that was going around talking about the police. They fuck the police and dissing us on tracks and stuff. Matter of fact, one of my guys that worked for me, you talked to Ladd before, and unfortunately we lost our buddy Tim Brendan. They call him Blondie. He was well known, and they would start getting on tapes and stuff like saying, "Oh, Blondie," and all this. But it was all, we used to call them guys studio gangsters because they weren't Easy and the Wrecking Crew and Ice Cube, you know, these cats that were part of the rap thing. They weren't about all this thing against the police. They were trying to make money and they was trying to be hard. But then later on, as the rap thing started exploding a little bit, you start getting cats that became part of it that start wanting to be gangsters, and thought that's when the Death Row thing started, you know, in the East Coast with Diddy and all them. And then because of first dissing, what they used to call it, dissing on wax, you know, each group, it got to the point where it started getting violent and had that East Coast, West Coast rivalry between Diddy and Suge and all them. So that's how all that just got wrapped up.
Well, that was going to be one of my next questions, because obviously you guys being hired to police the kind of community events where people are playing rap music, it kind of seemed to evolve to the next level where, from what I understand, when Death Row Records kind of emerged and was making a lot of money, they were hiring a lot of police to come and be security for them, but then a lot of those guys were real gang members. So can you speak on how kind of death row and the police and the sort of music industry merged.
Yeah, but let me correct part of it where they were saying some of the police officers that they start hiring to hire police officers were actually gang members themselves. No, that's not a fact. The thing is that, say for instance, death row I could talk a lot about because my son was part of that security and police thing when death row first started. Matter of fact, Suge and my son grew up, I lived about a block from where Suge was raised. And they both played football at Linwood. So I knew Suge long before he got involved in all this stuff. But then once all this developed and he started death row and stuff, he had a group of the mob Piru guys or Lulu Park Piru guys that Suge had to hire or had part of his entourage and stuff like that. I used to call them the gangster security. Okay? But then he, knowing it was getting a lot crazy in that, knowing he needed some police actual security. My son was a Compton police officer at the time, but he got hurt in an accident. Him and Suge was tight. So he got with Suge, and my son was starting a security business on his own called Right Way Security. So he got with Suge, because Suge first contacted me through Reggie and asked me to become head of his security. I told him, oh, no way. Ain't no way I'm going to get involved. You don't do that. I said, furthermore, half of them guys that you were talking about, his entourage, that I call them gangs, I told Suge, hey, I'm investigating. Some of them I'm going to be put in jail soon. Because they were thugs. They were out there, you know. But they were working. He was trying to give them jobs and get them right, but that wasn't happening. You see? So that was the gangster security. But Reggie, who was starting his security thing, and Suge got together, he started hiring for his security Compton PD guys, okay, to work off duty. See, none of them were gang members. But I used to refer to that as the police security versus the gangster, and that's what death row had. Okay, now, but that evolved into different things and problems and shit when Tupac came aboard, and then they had that, and it led up to the killings because of that east-west between Biggie and then with Tupac and Suge getting shot in Vegas, but that was a Crip thing that shot Southside with the Tupac and Suge thing, and then with the other situation with Biggie, naturally that was probably retaliation because of Tupac, and it just got messy. But that's kind of what got all that started. But you probably, I don't know if the audience know about the East Coast, West Coast rivalry, but I'm sure that's out there. Yeah. But that's kind of how that developed because of.
So we just touched on Death Row Records and their security situation. One of the major things that I wanted to ask you about was the death of Tupac Shakur, and especially the rumors of apparent chain snatching that took place in the lead up to his death. Can you tell me a little bit about that situation?
Oh yeah, that involved a kid named Trayvon Lane. That's a member of the Mob Pirus and part of Suge's entourage, and that was at the fight. There was a fight between Mike Tyson and someone, and they were attending the fight. But prior to that, during the summer before the fight or sometime before the fight, well, all the members of Suge's entourage, basically, guys worked with him, and some of the guys I talked about earlier is like his little security or whatever, guys were from the neighborhood. Yeah. They all had chains. Suge had got on death row chains was with the symbol, the guy in the electric chair with the gold chains and all that. The story was that East Coast during that rivalry, that Diddy had put out a bounty or something on whoever can get him or bring him a death row chain from somebody would get a $5,000. So anyway, Trayvon was at a Foot Locker or something over in the Lakewood Mall in the area, and he was, I think he was by himself. I'm not sure. It could have been somebody else with him. But at the time that these guys saw him, it was some Southsiders, and one of them was a notorious Southsider by the name of Baby Lane. So Baby Lane, who was the nephew of Kevy D, and somebody else allegedly attacked, I shouldn't say allegedly, but according to Trayvon, attacked him and snatched the chain to get the chain. Now there's different stories coming out. At first I thought they had gotten the chain, to try to turn it in for the bounty. But now some people are talking about he snatched it, but Trayvon was able to regain the chain, to get it back, in the melee. But they had kind of beat him a little bit, and he got away. So naturally he had came back to the hood and reported that these Crips, Southsiders, Baby Lane, and whoever else was with him, snatched the chain. So anyway, that went by. So that was known. I guess the fight occurred right after that or something, to the point that now Tupac is part of, want to claim mob and getting into all that activity, and they go to the fight. But while they were in the hotel, in the lobby or something, with Suge's little entourage, or Tupac part of it or something, Orlando Anderson, who was Baby Lane, he was at the hotel as well, walking through the lobby. And all of a sudden, Trayvon points to Orlando and say, "Hey man, that's the dude that snatched my chain. That's the dude that snatched the chain." Well, Tupac, wanting to show you down and all that, he was the first one to take off to warn him. And then that's when the entourage went on, and they went and assaulted Baby Lane right there in front of the cameras and everything. And that started that little incident. Well, now naturally, since they done their thing or whatever, they trying to get out of there. Suge and Tupac and all of them, and they take off. But Baby Lane, he subsequently went back to the hotel where his his uncle, Keefe D, and they little guys, all the Southsiders got together, and now they're gonna go and retaliate for the assault on Baby Lane. And then that's when apparently they were in this Cadillac and stuff, going, knowing that they were getting ready to open that Suge and them that night was gonna have a event at a club that Suge had just opened up called the Mob, 662, which on your telephone is MOB, 662. So the club. Now my son, who was over security, was over at the club. He wasn't with Suge and them at the entourage leading his security, because normally Reggie would have been riding with, Suge would have been riding with Reggie, I should put it, or Suge drive, and Tupac would be in a different car. That wouldn't have happened. But that night, since I guess it was the rush to get away from there and stuff, Tupac jumps in the car with Suge, and they take off, at some point, and I guess went to Suge's house, changed, and then they start heading to the club for the event. But in the interim, Baby Lane and Keefe D and Bubble Up and Big Dre, all them four in the Cadillac, they riding around looking. I think they even went up to the club to see if Suge, where they can, take a shot and retaliate. But they didn't. But at some point on their way back or something, still looking around, they see Suge and them in their little entourage in about 3 or 4 vehicles. And then that's when they pulled up alongside of Suge and thing. And supposed to, Dre, from what I understand, was supposed to be the one to do the shooting because they were on his side. Yeah. But Orlando wanted it so bad, he grabbed the gun and reached over and shot into the car and shot both of them. Wow. That's the story. But that's kind of how, and it was all started off and kicked off because of that fight behind the chain situation.
It's one of the most kind of famous hip-hop stories in history, and one of the most famous gang stories.
True story.
Something I wanted to ask you about, just with the fact that your son was kind of, working on the death row security situation. Did you ever worry about him, or were you ever kind of just concerned or nervous for him kind of being involved in that side, whether it was before or after the Tupac situation?
All the time. Yeah. Even when he first started working, because like I said, I turned down working because I knew that didn't mix. But my son, who was right there when I met with Suge, he knew he was starting his security business anyway. He was starting, wondered why, since I didn't want to take it, I didn't let tell Suge. But my son at that time, 30-something years old, starting his own business. So when I got away from that, he and Suge got together, and Suge started hiring him in his security, right way security, to work for him. And that's when he became Suge's security. Everybody said he was Suge's bodyguard or something. It wasn't necessarily he was his bodyguard. He was just over security, and he spent most of his time with Suge. And that's kind of like that. But Yeah, all that went down. There was a whole lot of stories behind that. I mean, somebody's out on the internet now talking about I was at the fight that night and I was part of the crowd and I was bodyguarding somebody. I was at home sleep. When the stuff jumped off, Reggie called me at home and told me both Suge just got shot and Tupac, and he thought Tupac was dead at that time, but Tupac died 2 or 3 days later or something. But that kind of how that went down that night and stuff. But
so something I was curious about. Obviously, a little bit of time passes. Biggie's killed as well, which you said may have been in retaliation. But I've heard stories. You can tell me whether this is true or not. That in the aftermath of Tupac being killed, it didn't happen in Compton or Los Angeles, but in the weeks that followed, I heard there was a lot of shootings that were kind of connected. Is that true?
That exactly happened. Let me tell you about my involvement, non-involvement, and because how that jumped off. Well, naturally, that night when it all went down, the police had to get involved because we talking about a homicide, and they didn't know it was a homicide, but attempt on my boy in this fight, and all this is going to be really, I would say, notorious. Yeah, shooting is going to be all over the news and all that. That particular night, naturally, when the police started investigating and getting involved, they hear about this Reggie Wright that's over security, who wasn't there, but he contacted them, and they talked. I'm talking about the investigator, not the patrol guy, and they wanted to get information about the shooting. Well, gang culture, you don't talk to the police, you don't give up that information. So Reggie, the kids, the guys that were in the entourage, the other cars and stuff that eventually chased the shooters off and chased after them, the police wanted to get their stories. But you don't talk, and you sure probably wasn't going to allow them to talk. So when they heard that Reggie Wright was over security and he talked to them and he couldn't get them to come and talk to the police, well, Reggie Wright is taboo, or he's part of it or something. I'm getting involved because Reggie is calling me knowing that I know about all this and it's going to come back to the city, like getting to your original question. He called me and started telling me, hey, man, that was Orlando and them behind this. They got in a fight because they saw saw Orlando and all that. He says, but it's them, So I'm into that right now. So I start trying to call that night, 2 o'clock in the morning, as the lieutenant. I started calling Las Vegas PD to tell them, hey, man, I got information who they're looking for and all that. But when they heard it was Reggie Wright, they thinking it's my son or me that's calling. So they shut it off. They shut it down. They didn't want to talk to me or they wouldn't take my calls to give them the information that night. So the next morning, when those guys got back to Compton and the Bloods knew, the mob knew that they did the shooting, well, all of a sudden they started retaliating the next morning. And they started a shooting where they saw one of the Southside members who wasn't out there in Vegas that I know of, his name Darnell Brim, Darnell coming out of a store, this 10, 11 o'clock that next morning, and they shot at Darnell. Unfortunately, it hit a little girl as well. I think she survived. I don't think it was a murder. But all that started. Then, after shooting Brim, the Southsiders came to the Blood area that night and shot, and they killed 2 of them. So we about to start all this investigation. But because of the Reggie Wright being involved and to the point of it, and I usually lead that type of investigation, the chief thought it was best to pull me off of that case directly in the investigations, and for me to put my sergeant, Bobby Baker, the one I told you being in with the guy, who was my sergeant, in charge. So I wasn't directly involved in it. But we start having shootings for the next 3 days, back and forth between Pirus and Southside. And I think we had several murders on each end and all that. So as a result of that, we had to crack down on both gangs. That's when we did a big, search warrants on each group. That Blondie and Lad kind of, did the warrants and stuff, and we started doing warrants at the houses and taking guns from both groups to kind of settle that down, that back and forth, because they did have several shootings as a result of that.
So there's been a lot of talk recently, obviously. Keefe D has been arrested in connection to the murder of Tupac. Orlando Anderson, who you...
I love how you say Tupac.
Tupac. The people keep getting on me. People say it's Tupac, but it doesn't sound... It doesn't feel right.
I got you. That's your accent. But go ahead.
But from what I understand, obviously you believe Orlando Anderson was responsible.
He was, yeah.
He passed away, obviously.
He didn't pass. Well, he passed away after he was shot several times in a shooting right after that.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you about. Was what can you tell me about the circumstances of his death? And was that connected? Was that just regular street activity?
No, that was something altogether different.
Really?
Or I should say we, because like I said, Las Vegas wasn't cooperating with us that much. Didn't want to, because they felt as though we had crooked cops or Reggie Wrights and all that. So they wasn't taking our information. And then again, there were detectives down here, came the next day and night to try to get the information we had, but they were reluctant into really dealing with us directly. But I guess at some point, Vegas PD says, hey, we don't want to pursue this. They out of Vegas, it's family setting and stuff. Then none of our people get shot. And this is me. It's just me, my... how would you say it? Not assumption, but my thinking at the time. They pulled the detectives away, told them to come back. I think the officials in the city didn't want to make an arrest or anything, because if they made an arrest on this, then all of a sudden with Tupac's notoriety, it would be big news every time they have a court hearing and stuff. Negative publicity coming to Vegas. So they pulled the detectives out. That was there. We still investigating all this shooting and stuff, and we had to deal with it, but we had gathered a lot of information regarding who was responsible, the vehicle used and all that. But then they kind of let it go.
So you guys couldn't arrest Orlando Anderson because it wasn't your case?
It wasn't our case. Only thing we could do is help and pass on information to support Las Vegas in their investigation. They were somewhat listening, but not totally, because Brennan and Ladd subsequently met with somebody and tried to give them some information as time is going on. Yeah. But Tupac, you were asking me directly about Orlando Anderson. Yeah. So well, Orlando was always a person of interest, a suspect in Las Vegas thing, but they really wasn't, in my opinion, that's what I want. In my opinion, they wasn't really trying to pursue it, because they really didn't want to make an arrest. Yeah. But then, months later or something like that, unrelated to all that, Orlando is going to a famous hamburger shop that's over there near Compton High School, right across from a car wash called Mom's Burger. Orlando goes over there at Mom's to get a hamburger or something. He looks across the street at the car wash, and it was 3 corner pocket Crips. Now these are Crips, but this is about dope. 2 of the brothers, they were brothers, over there, had allegedly owed some money to Keefe D for the dope. So Orlando wanted to deal with him, but he was by himself. He took off from Mossburger and went not too far and picked up a little dude that I've been knowing since a baby named Lil Al, who was definitely a Southsider. Him and Orlando was like this. They were raised together. So Al, Michael Duro, that's his name. But Al, he went and picked up Al and got Al to ride back up there with him. So when they got back up there, naturally the dudes are still at the car wash because they're getting their car wash. And then that's when your boy, Orlando, gets out to go confront him. He's armed, and he about to get in a confrontation with him, but they're armed. Yeah. And then at the car wash, a shooting occurred. Orlando ended up getting shot, plus he shot 2 of the 3 guys that were shooting at him, killed 2 of them. Really? Orlando did. But they get back in the car because Orlando gets hit. And at some point they said Michael grabbed the gun and shot at her, at the group too. I don't know, but they take off. They take off. Michael driving. Orlando in the passenger seat, wounded. I mean, probably dead because he's shot in the head and stuff. But anyway, that car wash is about 2 blocks from the police station. This is happening in the afternoon, 4 or 5 o'clock. I'm on the rear lot talking with Ladd and Brendan and some people. We hear the gunshots because it's that close. And so naturally they start putting out on the radio, the dispatch, we on the lot. gunshot victims at the car wash over there on the line. So I jump in my car first, and then Lad and them got in their car, but I take off first. Now, I have one of these undercover cars, like what wasn't undercover because everybody in Compton knew it, but it had all the bells and whistles on it. I take off with the bells and whistles to go toward Willowbrook to go to the car wash. But when I get almost to the corner of Alondra where you turn at Coco, I see this dude in the street, like trying to flag me down, you know. As I get close to him, I recognize it's Michael DeRoe, you know, and I'm knowing what kind of Michael was going to get involved. I knew he had to be involved in that shooting. So as I get out the car right quick, he's hollering, Red, Red. Because like I said, I know, Red, Red. They shot Lando. They shot Lando. They shot. I'm thinking, oh, they involved in something. So I hook Michael butt up right quick. Make sure he ain't on, right? So I hook him up, you know, and as I hook him up, I walk him to the side of the passenger side of that car, and there's Orlando in the car. And to me, he was like dead, but we called paramedics. They're rolling and stuff. So I had a couple of cops that rolled up there with me, Ray Richardson and a couple of my gang cops and some patrol that rolled up to my scene. I think even the chief rolled up there, Yuri. And then we all were there, but I told them to take Michael's butt to the station, and me and the gang, we went to the crime scene, because now police, regular patrol units, everybody there, and it's a mess. Not about mess, I mean it's a big crime scene. And so that's when we get to looking into it and all, and realize that was the two involved and what happened. So that kind of, that incident. But as far as anybody going to jail behind that, I think Michael DeRoe was the only one, that got, because he got convicted, because I think it came out somewhere in there, even though he flagged me down and he told me the story about getting picked up and Orlando coming to get him, but Orlando got out, naturally he was telling me to talk to him, but they start shooting at them. So that's kind of how that went down. But Michael ended up getting convicted, and matter of fact is in jail now. Naturally Orlando is got shot. That's when he got killed. Well, after the word gets out through law enforcement and through public and all that Orlando was dead, guess who got interested in the case again?
Oh, Las Vegas?
Yes, sir.
Really?
And then they sent people back now to get some of the evidence that during the raids, because we came up with information more about the shooting in Vegas and possible weapons and all that, they sent detectives down to collect that evidence now. Well, why? Because they could clear that as deceased, suspect deceased. That way no trial, nothing. I'm just showing you how the system works out here.
No, that's really fascinating. Wow. I think that's all we have time for now, but I'm very grateful for you to kind of explain everything to me. And
I just hope I covered it.
No, absolutely. We covered so much interesting stuff. You know, you gave me so much great context about the early days of the Bloods and Crips and the interaction with law enforcement, you know, especially everything with the Tupac case and how all that played out. You know, the insights are just really valuable, and I'm really grateful. So thank you so much. Thank you for your service, and really appreciate it.
No problem.
Thank you.
My pleasure.